You know that feeling when everything just clicks? Your mind is sharp, your mood is steady, your body feels like it's firing on all cylinders. That's not luck, that's what your body is capable of every single day. Now, I've looked into a lot of fish oil supplements, and honestly, most of them are mystery sourced, overprocessed, blasted with heat, and packed with synthetic add-ins. But this one is different. Omega-3 Rejuvenate from Big Bold Health starts with wild Alaskan salmon and cod, sustainably caught from some of the cleanest waters on the planet, and then it's processed at low temperatures to preserve what actually matters. We're talking about real omega-3s, naturally occurring vitamins A and D, and pro-resolving mediators, or PRMs, that help your body balance its own immune response. What does that mean for you? Clearer thinking, more stable mood, and real nature-based support for your heart and immune system. No shortcuts, no synthetic nonsense. And it was developed by Dr. Jeffrey Bland, a true pioneer in the world of complementary health. If you want to feel the difference, go to bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman. That's bigboldhealth.com/Hoffman and use code Hoffman for 20% off site-wide. Once you feel it, you'll know. Welcome back to today's Intelligent Medicine podcast. It's our weekly Q&A with Leyla, part 2. And we're continuing to answer the questions that you send to questions@drhoffman.net. So, Leyla, what's the next question, please?
Okay. From Carol, she was actually commenting about a question we had from another gentleman who emailed us a week ago saying, what is the value of the C-reactive protein blood test? Because Medicare apparently doesn't cover it. Carol writes, by the way, I was curious why the gentleman who asked the question about the value of hs-CRP could not get this test covered by Medicare. My doctor has included this in my twice-a-year blood work prescription for many years, and it's always been covered by Medicare. My results have always been well below 1, most recently. And I'm pretty sure this low inflammation result is probably why he wasn't as concerned that my LDL had ticked up or something. And that's the reason she was on rosuvastatin to start with. So, but yeah, apparently it could be that people living in different states, different coverage, different healthcare systems, there are probably differences.
Yeah.
Amongst those.
I just am looking it up, because Dr. Google AI can provide answers to these questions. It says Medicare does cover high-sensitive C-reactive protein testing only when deemed medically necessary. And so there are certain criteria where you have to show some risk. Typically for men over 50 and women over 60 with low-density lipoprotein greater than 130. Now,
that's a lot of people.
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And why it doesn't make sense is, let's say you have somebody come in and their LDL is, say, 160, which is kind of too high, and they're concerned about risk. So they put you on a statin. And lo and behold, statin works beautifully. The LDL is now like 70, okay, which is a target for prevention. Get the LDL down to 70, doctor's happy, reassures the patient, you're fine. But, and this has been shown by Paul Ridker, who's kind of like the guy who discovered highly sensitive C-reactive protein as a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. When you lower the cholesterol, by the way, statins have a little bit of an anti-inflammatory effect, so they will help sometimes with highly sensitive C-reactive protein, but it doesn't, if you have a really high one, it won't fix it. You will have what's called residual risk, which is kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to give the analogy is, if you've got regular home insurance, and like me, you live in a flood zone and you don't have flood insurance, you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
So regular, home insurance won't cover it. You have to have a separate policy. So in effect, this is what's called residual risk. You got to look at it. And if you're in a fool's paradise, you'll go, oh, fantastic. The statin's great. Oh, now you're not eligible for the hs-CRP reactive protein test because you don't have high cardiovascular risk. Well, you might in spite of the fact that we've lowered your LDL. So,
Yeah.
in other words, another irrational rule. And
Interesting.
so, doctors, one of the not joys of medicine is that doctors have to sing for their meal, in effect. They have to justify everything. And, sometimes doctors take advantage. They do inappropriate surgery. They run a bunch of unnecessary tests. So they have to get a pre-approval for a lot of stuff. And sometimes the electronic medical record will tell them what's allowed and what's not allowed. This is kind of like, it's practicing medicine for the doctors. The computer will tell you what you can and can't do and what you can and can't prescribe.
Terrible, but that's what it's become.
Yeah.
Wow. So, all right. Carol, thanks for following up with us. We appreciate it, and keep in touch. Good health to you. All right. This comes from Danny. He's asking about butyrate supplements. He asks, are they worthwhile to take? Butyrate being good for the colon cells, the cells of the large intestine, short-chain fatty acids are helpful in this regard. So butyrate is a part of that. We get butyrate from diet. Some people are low in short-chain fatty acids, depending on their GI map. For instance, I believe that's one of the testing that looks at all of that. So to increase the butyrate, you could take a supplement, like he's asking about. As well, there's butyrate that you can get from the diet. Butter is one. Butter and ghee.
It's funny because I ordered like this super organic, like really great butter, and I got like 2 pounds of it because that was the minimum.
Oh, fantastic.
And I opened it up and I said, this butter smells funny. It just does. And I got to be a little careful with using it because it imparts kind of that goat cheesy smell. But the good news is it's funky. But I go, I'm not throwing this out. It's not bad. It's just rich in butyrate, which is you can make stink bombs out of butyrate. I remember at Columbia when I was there, and there were the Columbia riots in the 1970s against the Vietnam War. They threw a stink bomb at Hamilton Hall, which is the administration building. It made it uninhabitable for like a couple of weeks. It was butyrate. You can actually, a chem student can synthesize butyrate in the lab and make a very potent stink bomb out of it.
Okay.
So, coming back to butyrate.
Yeah.
It's actually a byproduct of, it is in foods, especially dairy foods, and goat cheese. In fact, I think butyr is Greek or Latin for goat, if I'm not mistaken. So butyric, so it smells like a goat's hindquarters. So it is actually a fuel for the enterocytes. Yes. The enterocytes can use glucose from the circulation, but they can also support themselves through the short chain fatty acids that they come into contact with in the colon.
Yes.
And so it's a healthy thing to have butyrate. Butyrate is a byproduct of fermentation. There's certain bacteria that work on insoluble fibers to make butyrate. So, so if you don't have enough butyrate, why not take oral butyrate? And I was thought that was a good idea. And I'm an early adopter. I started doing that in the 90s. And then I read that oral butyrate doesn't help that much. Why? Because it's kind of absorbed too high up and it doesn't reach the intestine. You have to have endogenous butyrate that's made inside. So the best way to up your butyrate is to change your diet, to take the type of probiotics or bacteria that will ferment the insoluble fiber into I guess I might be able to foods. It's not insoluble fiber; it's soluble fiber. It's
We're talking about chilled and cooled potatoes. The restructuring
resistant starch. Yeah, right.
Resistant starch helps to feed. It helps to promote the short chain fatty acids. Resistant starch, whether it's cooked and cooled potatoes, maybe a white bean salad or something like that, for example. people, there are practitioners that are saying, green banana powder, put that in your smoothie and things like that. And I often tell people just get some ghee or some butter incorporated as well to up your butyrate.
Yeah.
And that often helps.
Yeah.
That often helps.
So, do you remember when we used to give butyrate enemas to people with ulcerative proctitis?
No.
Okay, because that was something that we used to do.
Oh, okay.
I would order it from a compounding pharmacy, and the idea was there you really got the butyrate to go up into the end of the large intestine of the colon in the sigmoid, which is the twisty part before
colon.
The rectum. And this actually, I think, was helpful for people with proctitis. And there's some papers on butyrate, but that way, you don't swallow it because by the time it gets all the way down there, it gets absorbed and it does not reach the site of action where it's needed right at the end of your intestinal tract. So you just administer it rectally in an enema.
There you go. All right. So not a butyrate supplement, Danny, but a butyrate enema if one is warranted. So that could be.
Again, if your colitis is higher up, then it's not going to be helpful.
Yeah. That's not going to be helpful, right?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, don't go overboard. It's just,
right. Exactly. But that's interesting about the butyrate supplements because they were a thing. They were a while. They were all the rage for a while, but then they're not
because they never really caught on.
Yeah. They're
still around.
Yeah. Okay. Danny, thank you for that. All right. We've got a question from...
Or perhaps we should attend to some business. Maybe we should allow one of our sponsors an opportunity to strut their stuff for our listeners. So here goes. Listen up. Ever walk into a room and forget why you're there? Lose your train of thought mid-sentence? Feel like your brain is running on fumes by 2 p.m? Try Kyolic Specialty Series Smart Mushrooms Plus. This isn't caffeine. It's not some jittery stimulant that crashes you an hour later. This is a clean, science-backed formula built around certified organic lion's mane mushrooms, clinically shown to support the nerve growth factor that actually helps your brain maintain and organize neurons. We're talking real foundational support for focus and mental clarity, and it doesn't stop there. It's combined with Kyolic Aged Garlic Extract, aged up to 20 months on organic California farms, plus Aronia Berry Extract, selenium, and vitamin B12 for long-term brain health and executive function. 2 capsules with a meal, once a day, vegan, non-GMO, no gluten, no dairy, no artificial anything. Kyolic Smart Mushrooms Plus from Wakanaga. Learn more about this and the entire Kyolic Mushrooms Plus line at kyolic.com. That's KYOLIC.com. Look for Kyolic at natural health stores nationwide and online. Thanks for listening and thanks for supporting our sponsors. They are what make intelligent medicine a continuing free resource to you. And we actually have some really interesting new sponsors coming up. Leyla, I love my sponsors.
Yes.
I also,
we're great.
Everything that they make, I take.
Exactly.
Which means I take a lot of stuff, but I'm very, very happy to be in relationship with these sponsors who make really high quality products.
Absolutely. We've got an email here from Judy. Hi, Dr. Hoffman and Leyla. I read an article differentiating the differences in heart attacks in men and women. One of the causes made for women is having excess iron, and how important your ferritin and transparent saturation numbers are. If both become high, like ferritin over 100 and transparent saturation above 45%, that could become iron overload and is concerning. What say you?
Well, first of all, it's not more of a problem in women than in men. It's more of a problem in men than in women because women menstruate and give birth, and hence they also have lower levels of testosterone, which tends to boost blood counts. And so men tend to have higher iron levels, and if they're genetically prone to iron overload with something called hemochromatosis, which you can test for genetically. Men develop problems with hemochromatosis before women. Women can develop problems with hemochromatosis, but usually they're somewhat shielded prior to menopause because they lose blood. So you can look at the ferritin. Ferritin is one measure. Be careful because ferritin is also what's called an acute phase reactant. So you might see, this is, remember, looking at blood tests of patients with ulcerative colitis who had a paradoxical thing. They were anemic, but they had a seemingly adequate or high ferritin. What was going on with that? Well, they were bleeding. They actually were bleeding in the toilet and had low iron. But their ferritin, because they were inflamed, was elevated. It is what's called an acute phase. So you got a spurious elevation of ferritin in an inflammatory condition. All right. But for most people, that's not the case. And ferritin is a great measure of your iron stores. More sensitive than iron saturation, which is based on iron and transferrin.
Transferrin,
I mean, transferrin is the thing that carries the iron. It transfers the iron. So how much iron is docking on your transferrin is your friend. It's kind of like, is the airplane half empty or is the airplane fully booked, with your transferrin? If it's a very high percentage, then it could mean that there's iron overload.
Excess iron also may feed infection or being the acute phase reactant. Maybe that we're seeing the results of the infection, spiking the ferritin that way. But
chicken and
Judy
egg.
says,
chicken and egg. Yeah.
Judy mentions ferritin above 100, but hang on. Institute for Functional Medicine says we need a ferritin of about 100 for thyroid function. So I don't think 100 is high.
It's 70 for good hair. 70 for good hair.
At least. At least 70.
But, there is a downside. Look, it's actually one of the explanations for why men get heart disease earlier than women. Now, women catch up. And so you can't ignore the fact that the majority of women, cause of death is cardiovascular disease. They simply get it later than men. But men tend to have higher iron levels. Hence, it's good to get your iron checked as a cardiovascular risk factor and even a risk factor for dementia. Because if you have this tendency to high iron, well, there's a simple way to deal with it, is give blood. It's like...
Give blood,
It's like, the Lancet, the oldest medical journal in the world. It's a British medical journal. Well, a Lancet is what the bloodletters used to use. That was medicine in 1700. In fact, that's what that's kind of probably how they killed George Washington. He had what seems like a form of congestive heart failure, and they bled him and bled him and bled him to the point where, he passed.
Oh my. Yeah. So Judy, and the other thing is, there are other reasons where you could get a higher, if you're eating high heme foods, which are very good for you, but you're also taking vitamin C with those meals, it really enhances the absorption of it. So if your ferritin is already high, you may want to rethink taking vitamin C with your food. Instead, take it in between your meals so it's not enhancing the absorption of the good high heme, good quality protein that you're eating. And again, give blood. And by the way, more is not better, because on the opposite end of the spectrum, just a little story, Dr. Hoffman, a friend of mine came to me asking, they said I have, my ferritin is very low and I should get checked for blood loss, colonoscopy, endoscopy, all of this kind of thing. And nobody asked her that she recently gave blood 3 weeks prior to those blood tests and had given blood even before that 2 times already in that year. I said, wait a minute. Stop doing that. Go back in 6 months, get all those tests again. Everything came back to normal. So don't go running to the doctor after you've donated blood. You need to, your bone marrow takes a solid 2 months to replenish all of that, right? And so you want to wait that amount of time. Don't give blood at the Red Cross and then go skipping down to the doctor's office and, hey, what's going on? Your ferritin's in the basement. What's happening here? Just donated blood. You have to tell them that.
Yeah, just going back to the time I broke my leg, breaking your femur in an accident is associated with a lot of blood loss because you bleed into the wound. You don't just break the leg. So my thigh was black and blue. Plus, I had surgery to put in a titanium rod, which subsequently was taken out. But at the end of it, they said, we almost gave you a blood transfusion, but that was in the days where they were kind of worried about AIDS, and still they were worried about hepatitis C. They hadn't, they were not anxious to give people blood transfusions. So they said, your blood count's 23. Well, normal blood count for a young male, is like 43 or 45. So I had half a normal blood count. So they said, go home and take iron, and you should be fine. So, I started taking iron, but I was also on painkillers, which are very constipating. Opiate painkillers are constipating. Then I took iron, which is very constipating. Plus, frankly, when you break your high femur, you have a high femoral fracture, it's really hard to sit on the toilet. So, it was like, no, I'm not taking the iron. But so what I said instead was, and I couldn't even leave the apartment. I said to family members, I said, bring me, go to the Greek place and get me shish kebab and buy me steak and get me hamburger. And, I made a concerted effort. And it's just like, I went to town on that stuff. Within, you said, right, that the bone marrow takes a couple of months to recover. Within a short period of time, it was about 90 days, I had normalized my blood counts without taking iron, because the iron was bothering me.
Of course, it bothers a lot of people.
Yep.
And not to mention, Dr. Hoffman, post-surgery, you really needed that additional high biological value protein.
Absolutely.
To heal and get well.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Trauma.
Yeah.
So, okay. So anyway, that being said.
Yeah.
And, all right. So I think we have an additional question, do we not?
Yeah, we've got a question here. Hilda writes, "Dear Leyla and Dr. Hoffman, I can't believe that nattokinase lowered my blood pressure so much that I no longer need to take 12.5 milligrams of hydrochlorothiazide anymore. My BP was usually high, but now I'm an 85-year-old. I still bike, I hike, I snowshoe up small mountains.
I love it.
And now with nattokinase, my systolic is in the 107 to 110 range.
Perfect.
When it used to be 120s to 130s.
Okay.
However, Hilda says, I worry that even though nattokinase may help prevent clots, there's also a chance that taking it can cause a clot to suddenly dislodge, leading to a stroke. Relocation?
This is kind of like, it's not like taking Drano, like when you ever see the commercials for Drano? They have like a glass, plumbing, and they show the Drano going to let it, everything gets just blasted out of the pipes. Nattokinase doesn't work that way. It's not like Drano. It's not going to cause a plaque to dislodge by virtue of dissolving it or pushing it out. So what's interesting about nattokinase is it recently came back on my radar screen just this morning, because I was listening to a podcast with a guy who I like to listen to, because, I'm putting out all these podcasts. What do I listen to? Well, I listen to Peter Attia and Dr. Andrew Huberman, two great podcasters. And Huberman was talking about nattokinase for lowering cholesterol. And I tend to not put a lot of credence. Well, let's put it this way. I mostly think of nattokinase as something that might be part of a cardiovascular prevention program, because it may protect the arterial walls, and it also seems to have an anti-blood clotting effect. Okay? It's proteolytic enzyme. Yeah. But I looked it up, and it actually, there are some bona fides to nattokinase for cardiovascular prevention in a variety of ways. And I just pulled up an article. It's from 2025. It says natto is a traditional Japanese fermented food. And, it's acquired taste, because it's really kind of like, it has kind of a cheesy flavor, very umami kind of flavor. And It's made from soybeans fermented. I used to make natto when I was macrobiotic. I used to actually sprinkle some of the starter on a tray of cooked soybeans, and I'd stick it in the oven with a 150 watt light bulb, which was incubated. I didn't turn on the oven, but the light bulb gave it heat. So it was, probably took it to maybe 110 or something like that, 115 degrees, if that, just above, body temperature. And it would ferment, and it would be like this mold would grow over it. And it would knit it together, and it would also impart this flavor. So nattokinase, we know, is a source of vitamin K, which is good for the arteries, right? But here it says nattokinase actually is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor, like statins. It has a statin-like effect. Yeah.
Wow.
It also enhances lipoprotein lipase activity, which is a little bit like the pesky, PCSK9 drugs.
Yeah.
So it seems to combine some of the effects of cholesterol-lowering drugs. It says, compared with traditional lipid-lowering drugs, nattokinase has a multifaceted lipid-lowering mechanism and a lower risk of side effects, which makes it suitable for patients intolerant of traditional drugs. When combined with natural products such as statins, it can play a synergistic role and further reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. So, yeah. So, that's interesting. Now, why would it lower blood pressure? I'm not sure. To me, that's not part of its suite of actions, but, maybe we should investigate why that is mechanistically plausible.
Because maybe it's thinning the blood a little bit.
But thinning the blood shouldn't, people who take warfarin or Coumadin, or Pradaxa, they don't, it doesn't lower their blood pressure, and those are blood thinners. So, I don't know what, but hey.
But Hilda, that's great about your blood pressure.
And, when I'm 85, I want to hike and I want to, all those things, great.
All that.
It's all good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very, very much for your question, Hilda. Keep on keeping on. That's great how active she is and everything. So, a reminder to everybody, questions@drhoffman.net. That's questions@drhoffman.net. And also a reminder to all of you that you can shop hundreds of curated vetted supplements in Dr. Hoffman's full script.
You see this? Can you see? Can you see this?
To the fullest.
Yes, that's my full script T-shirt.
That's terrific.
I recommend hundreds of people to full script, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt.
Oh my goodness. You can expand to all kinds of different protocols for your particular health concerns like allergy, bone, brain, detox, heart, which we talked about today, immune, sleep, and stress support. Don't forget, go to drhoffmanstore.com. That is drhoffmanstore.com. I want that T-shirt too. Okay.
Right. And just a reminder, Fullscript is a great place to get your supplements generally, but look for, when we advertise, look for specials, because some of the companies are also on Fullscript, but some of the companies will offer specials to intelligent medicine listeners through a direct, we create a website, go to whatever, put in a coupon code when you go to their website, Hoffman 10 or Hoffman 20 or Hoffman 30, and you'll get a discount. So, you can also find them on Fullscript. Great. I'm happy however you get the supplements, but if you want to take full advantage of a discount, just listen to the commercials and look at the specials and order direct from the company. Or alternatively, some of the companies are on Fullscript. They'll say, hey, knock yourself out, go to Fullscript and get our stuff. Where you'll also get a discount, because I set that up for our intelligent medicine listeners and our patients.
All kinds of things for you to take advantage of. So don't forget to do that, everybody. And we appreciate your questions. It's terrific.
Questions@drhoffman.net. Questions@drhoffman.net. So, once again, I want to commend our listeners for some really great questions to tee off on. Keep them coming, and we'll do our best to field them next week.
Yes.
Until then,
thanks, everybody.
I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman. Today with Leyla Mutin. It's our weekly Q&A with Leyla, and this is the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I want to thank you for listening to the Intelligent Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded every weekday. And please give us a rating and review. It truly helps new people discover intelligent medicine. The Intelligent Medicine Podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, please visit drhoffman.com and discover everything intelligent medicine has to offer, including frequently updated, unbiased health news and fully vetted product and supplement recommendations.
This is Leyla Muden, registered dietitian nutritionist. I maintain a private practice and see patients regularly. If you require a nutrition consult with me but live out of town, there's no need to travel to New York City. I have telephone and telehealth consultations with clients from all over the country. Please visit drhoffman.com for more information. And to set up an appointment, call 212-779-1744. That's 212-779-1744. I look forward to being a collaborator in your healthcare.